Hi, welcome to the Net Hero Podcast Special Edition, all about the Big Zero Show. In this briefing, we'll be looking at the most important thing of all, food. This briefing is all about food. It's the most vital thing that we do. It's one of the most basic things we do. We've got to eat. And how we eat could have an effect on the planet. It already is. So what are we doing about that? Do we even think about it? Most of us have a conversation about food and it's kind of the calories, and we're thinking about, are we getting a bit rotund? But more and more, it's coming to the fore. And if you go to certain restaurants, you'll actually see the carbon that's associated with what you're eating. And this will be a big thing that we've got to address as the years go by. I'm delighted to say joining us on this briefing is Tom Maidment, who's Group Product Sustainability Manager at Hilton Food Groups. Tom, you'll be speaking at the show. So first of all, thank you very much for coming along. We're looking forward to your session.
No, it's a pleasure. I'm looking forward to it.
Food is that, isn't it? It's the thing we all have. We all use it. We have to use it. We cook it, we eat it, we consume it. It's a billion, trillion pound industry. And I think it's responsible for 30% of sort of global emissions. But it's probably been the thing that most of us haven't really thought about. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah, I think it's the only decision we all make 3 times a day, right? Is what we're going to eat. And it's probably one of the most consequential regular decisions we can make around our carbon footprint, certainly that we have sort of an agency over. And you're right that historically, because it is quite complicated, it's an enormously diffuse industry.
Yeah.
It has been neglected because, you look at a power station, you can kind of go, I get how I can tackle that enormous chimney that's producing a huge amount of emissions.
Yeah, exactly.
Exactly. Whereas the methane from a cow or the methane from a sort of an aquatic underwater system that's being disturbed, and the nitrogen flux in a sort of manure heap, that seems a lot harder. And we've, for very good reasons, tackled the big and very easy low-hanging fruit of energy. And now we're having to look as the piece of that pie has grown that is agriculture, it's coming more to the fore.
I think most people will see, if you ask the average person in the street, they get transport, right? We're moving to EVs. They get solar panels, they get that. They probably even get things like maybe kind of, I don't want to buy my clothes from certain brands, I won't name them, but I want to have clothes that last a bit longer, because that conversation's been out there. When I think about food, and I think most people think about food, they're thinking about the fat or the carbohydrates or kind of what it's like for their health. I don't think many people think about the emissions. Now, that's the public. Is that actually the same case when it comes to businesses? When they're looking at their carbon footprint, most of them are probably looking at their kind of emissions from the scope 1 and 2, but they're not really thinking about food. And is that something that's difficult for you to try and bring that to the fore?
Yeah, no question. I mean, I've been working on low carbon food for about 7 years now. And one of the first conversations I had with a big food company, I was told, food can't have a carbon footprint, it's made of plants. That was that will stick with me for a very long time. But we have seen business move really quickly on this.
Yes.
Understand that actually we are quite a large part of this solution, and that we are going to have to be responsible for our emissions, both in our direct emissions and in our supply chain. And moving forward, that's going to be really important. So I think we have seen businesses very quickly, and we're still on that journey, recognize, certainly even in the last 3 years that I've worked at Hilton, the supply chain has woken up to the fact that this is going to be a really important part of our business as we go into the future. Government's working on this, and I'm engaged in that, in how we can standardize that, how we can get measurement standardized, because there's no point competing on measurement. We want to be looking at how we can measure in the same way and deliver those reductions in different ways, or ideally across supply chains in partnership, and partnering to deliver that.
So a little bit about Hilton Food Group for those who don't know. How big is the group? What does it do in terms of kind of, is it supplying food to big restaurants? Is it supplying to the supermarkets where we get our food? How does it all work?
Well, both. So Hilton is a global company. It's one of those companies that you've probably never heard of, but have almost definitely used their products.
Right,
So
gotcha.
we supply into retailers primarily meat and fish products, but also added value and convenience products around the world. So generally into to retailers. So we supply into Tesco in the UK in a very big way of meat, and we supply fish to a number of different retailers. We are also the largest food service butcher in the UK through our Fairfax Meadow subsidiary. And there's also, we provide supply chain solutions to companies around the world. So factory automation, software solutions as well.
Why is it, do you think, that this livestock issue, and I remember interviewing Ed Davey a few years ago, and he had a cracking moment at the show where he talked about it's not from cow farts, it's from cow burps, and the methane. I mean, look, it was tongue in cheek, but it was it was one of those things about kind of, yes, there's emissions that come from agriculture. I think most people will probably think of it as an ancillary thing rather than that direct side of like you talked about earlier, the low-hanging fruit. I mean, I can relate to the LED light bulbs that are in this office right now. I can't really relate to when I go and get my lunch, what was the carbon footprint of that bit of tuna I put in my mouth, or that salad I had, or whatever. Is that incumbent on me as a consumer, or is that incumbent on you guys who are supplying that food? Because what I'm trying to get to is, for a wider business, should they think that this is really something they absolve to company like yourselves to sort out your carbon and do that? Or do we have a responsibility ourselves as the actual consumer that makes the purchasing decision?
I think it's a bit of both, but I think the primary responsibility sits with the producers. So the supply chain before the consumer. So that's all the way from the retailer back. And that's, in terms of the easiest way for the public to decarbonize, is for us to help them. So never to put the high carbon solution in front of them. So at Hilton, we've developed a transition plan for how we can decarbonize livestock, how we can get all of our primary products from where they are now, which in many cases is quite high carbon, to a net zero or net negative in some cases position. Because, as you say, a lot of these are biological processes, but they are biological processes which we can have an impact on. So we've done some work with the University of Lincoln looking at how we can decarbonize emissions from manure and emissions, as exactly as you said, the cow burps from the cattle digestion, which is massive, but we're pretty confident actually we can get rid of most of those emissions. We're doing some work with Oxford looking at how we can reduce emissions from land, and how we measure that influences our decision making.
That's a whole new podcast, how you stop cows burping. I think that's one for another time. I love it though. It's brilliant.
Exactly.
But this thing here, it's the most fundamental relationship we've had, right? For 100,000 years is crops and growing and arable land, and then farming and animals. And it's such a fundamental part. Is it one that you think, and this might be a sort of a philosophical question, it seems to be very much a conversation that you have in Western developed nations looking at this, whereas actually the more sustainable farming is probably happening in less developed nations and goes direct from the market, from the soil that you eat much fresher. My relatives in Calcutta eat much fresher because they come every day from the market. But in a sense that this whole thing about where we're sourcing our food, the fact I can get an avocado today when I shouldn't be able to, realistically, these are all things that are all part of it. So where do you see this whole, global picture of food and how we cut it? Is it at present something that probably needs to be done here, where retailers like yourselves are sourcing that material and trying to stop that, and then we can look at having the conversations with people who are growing it in developing nations? Or you're trying to do both at the same time?
I think we're obviously having to engage with farmers, and increasingly we're working out how we do that, and the most effective way we can do that with the hundreds of thousands of farmers in our supply chain. In terms of kind of how we can deliver that, we see our purpose as I was saying, the kind of the research and understanding, okay, how do we deliver this? Because most of the farmers in the world are one or two people. They're very small businesses. They don't have the capacity to do the research. So we do the research, and we can then tell them this is how we're going to do it, and work with them to put the financing in place to deliver these transition plans that we develop as the kind of the big boys in the industry, and then that can feed down through the industry. And that's something we've done with seafood particularly. We've, as the big processes we've got together, developed tools to measure it. Now we're working together on how we can implement reductions in our supply chain in a coordinated way, so that we're not trying to put the burden on them when they don't have the capacity to do it.
Yeah, understood. Exactly. And that's, I think, the biggest thing, isn't it? Before we end, we'll have a lot of end users coming who will have organizations. There'll be universities there at the Big Zero Show. There'll be people from local authorities, businesses. They've all got catering, right? They've all got catering needs. Is this one of the things that people need to start having conversations about, which is when you get your supplier for your canteen or whatever you're going to do, start to look at this? Because I think, as I said right at the beginning, I wouldn't really have thought about the emissions of where I get my sandwich. But is this the sort of conversation that us as business people and people in public sector organizations need to start having, and not just think about how we, turn off the lights and empty our bins, but we look at where we're getting our food from?
Yeah, I mean, we're unique at that show, right? In that our products are, every single person in that room is an end user of our product.
Yeah.
So we want them to be thinking about it in their own life, but yeah, absolutely. They need to be thinking about it in their catering department, where that's big, but also understanding which companies are able to supply them, what policies can they put in place to deliver this. But actually some of that, the work's already been done. So what we don't want them to do is necessarily to reinvent the wheel, but to work with companies who are specialists in this area to deliver that with them, rather than looking at what is probably less than 1% in every one of those businesses of their overall footprint.
Yeah, of course.
Really focus too much on that, but work with the specialists to put in place the right purchasing requirements that they're probably already seeing from some of their suppliers, and working out which of their suppliers are delivering that best.
Brilliant. Do you know what? I'm looking forward to the show. I mean, in the essence, food matters, and it really does for that. Tom, look forward to seeing you at the Big Zero Show. And I think your session will be absolutely vital for people to look at, because I think it's one of those things that, again, we're trying to open up the conversations away from just kind of let's get some EVs and let's get some solar. And I think what we put in our gobs is very important. Tom, look forward to seeing you at the show.
You've just heard the Net Hero podcast from FutureNetZero.com. Join us as we help you find ways to cut your carbon footprint as we head towards net zero. Subscribe and follow us on social media. FutureNetZero.com. Better business, better planet.